Now, most of this chapter has to do with the revelations of God to the king and then to Daniel and his friends. And God is showing that He alone is God. He makes this revelation, this vision, this dream to the king, which the king sort of cannot explain, right? And have you ever had dreams where it's very clear to you what the dream is, but if you don't write it down somewhere, you forget what the dream was? Right? We've been there, right? And so sometimes, you know, you bump in your head the rest of the day trying to figure out why you can't remember all of. You may remember little parts of the dream, but you don't remember all the dream sometimes. And sometimes you don't remember the dream at all, right? And sometimes God speaks to us in dreams. He gives us visions. And we need to try to, when we have a dream, when we have a revelation, we need to start writing it down immediately, because otherwise we'll forget. But in this case, King Nebuchadnezzar gets this dream. And when we spoke about last week, about Daniel's faith, right, and Daniel's obedience in chapter 1, he did not allow himself to be defiled by the king's food. And the revelation at the end was that they looked, the young man, Daniel and his 3 friends, looked better than the other ones that were eating the king's food. And so today, we're going to continue in the book of Daniel, but today we're going to get into the meat of this dream that Daniel had. And next week, we'll discuss actually the answer to the dream that Daniel had. Today we're going to discuss the king and his dream and the steps that he took to try to get this dream revealed to him. Let's read Daniel 2. Daniel 2, 1 to 23. He says, now in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king's dreams. So they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I have a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give his interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you will gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this reason the king was angry and very furious, and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then with counsel and wisdom Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret. So Daniel and his companions might might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in the night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the time and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's demand." Heavenly Father, we come before you, Lord, to thank you, Father, for the words that we're about to receive. We pray, Lord, that our hearts are open to what you have for us, O Lord, and that we understand the things that only can come from you. And I pray, Father, that our souls, O Lord, our mind, our hearts are all in line with what you have for each and every one of us. Not only today, but in the future. We thank you and praise you, Lord, in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. So, my first point is desperate for answers, right? And we know that the king is desperate for answers. In verse 1 it says, "Now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that he left him." Again, sometimes we have a dream that is in some cases horrifying. And we wake up in the middle of the dream, and then we can't fall asleep. Right? We're thinking about what's going on. What was this? And by the way, the enemy can put dreams in your head as well. Not only God, but the enemy can put dreams in your head as well. And we have to be very careful that we can understand what comes from God and what does not. If we're not centered in God, the enemy can attack us in very many ways. The enemy is rampant throughout the world. And he's attacking people because, especially people of God. He doesn't attack the people out in the world, they're his. He doesn't have to bother with them. He attacks us because he doesn't want us to continue to spread God's word, for one. And he wants us back. And so we have to be very careful when we have dreams, that we can understand what these dreams are, where they come from. So the king is troubled by this dream, right? He's troubled, and like Pharaoh, for example. Remember Pharaoh with the dream that he had? And so Pharaoh had this dream, and he told the dream to the magicians and the sorcerers and the astrologers. None of the wise men in Egypt at the time could interpret the dream. And God used this time to get Joseph out of the dungeon. Joseph had been in prison for something he didn't do, right? Pharaoh's wife accused him of something, Pharaoh's commander's wife accused him of something he didn't do. They threw him in the dungeon. And this was, after many years in the dungeon, this was the time that God used to bring him back out and give him his place right next to Pharaoh, right? And so we see that in this dream that King Nebuchadnezzar has, none of the wise men are able to interpret this dream. And in verses 2 and 3 it says, "Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I have a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream." He's anxious, right? He's nervous, he's anxious, he's troubled, and he wants somebody to tell him the dream. And what this tells me is that he cannot remember the whole dream. So he's saying, okay, so if you're so good at what you do, tell me the dream. If you're so good at what you claim to be, tell me the dream. And because the king cannot remember the whole dream, there is an issue. Because the king is using his power to say, okay, if you don't tell me the dream, I'm going to kill you all. So, for example, let me just give you a little bit of what each one of these people that the king brought to himself are. So the magicians were people who could transform things and create illusions, right? You remember when Moses turned his staff into snakes, the magicians were able to do the same. Except that Joseph's snake ate all of the other snakes, so it showed God's power through that. But they were able to do this, right? The astrologers claim to have divine inspiration to tell about other people's character and other people's predict the future. And we see people reading cards, and we see all these supposed psychics out there who supposedly know. They don't know anything. I mean, you go there and someone will tell you, well, you know, I see this. So I'm Hispanic, right? And so I go to them and I see this Hispanic woman in your life. Duh, what a secret. You tell me there's a Hispanic woman in my life. Oh yeah, that's a big secret that you're telling me. And that's what they use your words against you in order to tell you what you want to hear. That's what they do. Then you have the sorcerers, right? And these people supposedly have magic powers. And sorcerers' powers are usually evil in nature. They're usually evil in nature. And then you have the Chaldeans, which were men that were from the southern part of Babylon. Some of them were priest magicians. Think about this, priest magicians in the southern part of Babylon for whatever gods they claim to have faith in and praise. Now, the king is perplexed because of this dream. And sometimes God reveals things to us that make us nervous, make us anxious, that are perplexing to us. But God always has a plan. Nothing that God does just for the sake of doing it. Everything God does, He has a plan. And we're going to see later on what God's plan in this situation, right? In his desperation, right, the king calls all of these people, and none of them is able to tell him anything about his dream. And so now the king is getting upset. And the magicians, the astrologers, I'm sure that at this point, you know, they keep asking him, well, tell us the dream. In my second point, by the way, is only God can reveal the dream, right? Only God can reveal the dream. In verse 4, the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, and they say, "O king, live forever. Tell your servant the dream, and we will give you the interpretation." First of all, from verse 4 on to verse 7 in Daniel, everything is written in Aramaic, by the way. In the original Bible, it was written in Aramaic. It's the only part of the Bible that was written in Aramaic. Everything else was either written in Hebrew or Greek. But this is the only part of the Bible that was written in Aramaic. And so the king answered to the Chaldeans, says, "My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap." So now the king is being firm in, this is what I'm going to do to you if you don't answer me. Now, one of the ways that they cut people in pieces in the old days was they took 4 trees, right? They found a place where there were 4 trees together. They bent the trees forward, right? And they tied your arm two to these 2 trees, and then your legs to these 2 trees. And they tied it in the middle, right? And what they would do is, when they cut the rope in the middle, and the trees went back like this, it took you apart. That was part of the... this is horrible, right? It sounds horrible. It is horrible. But this is what these people did. This is how they reacted to things. Now you know that no one who has God in their lives is going to do something like that. So we know what evil comes from these situations. In verse 9, it says, "If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall show you. You can give me its interpretation." Now, the king has been going back and forth with the Chaldeans, right? Nobody's going to be able to tell you the dream. You tell me the dream, and I'll tell you what the answer is. Tell me the dream, and I'll tell you what the answer is. The king says, "Look, all you want me to do is tell you the dream so you can tell me a lie." And who knows how many times they lied to the king about other things, right? And the king believed them because they're the wise men. Now the king is saying, this time you're not going to get away with it. This time you're going to have to tell me the truth. You're not going to lie to me anymore. You're going to tell me the truth. You're going to know that you're going to tell me the dream, or I'm going to kill you all. And he sends out a decree that actually starts to do that, right? The king is putting them to the test, and they're failing the test. As a matter of fact, they got a 0 on this test so far. Because they're not able to tell the king what he wants to hear. In verse 10, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. And they're right. They're right. There's no man on earth who can tell somebody else's dream. No man, unless that man has had a revelation from God about that dream. But no man, right, especially no ungodly man, is going to be able to tell that. And we know that none of these people were godly people. And so none of them are going to be able to tell the king what he wants to hear. But God was preparing the way for Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego to be revealed as the godly men that they truly were. God is using this dream, like he did with the Pharaoh, to bring godly men to a kingdom that was otherwise ungodly. God is using this time to show the king that although he has all these powers on earth, right? Because King Nebuchadnezzar had all the power over all the kingdoms on the earth at the time. Even all the kings had to bow down to him. He was the most powerful king of his time. And God is saying, you are there because I have given you the authority to be there. You are there because I have allowed you to be there. And you will only be there until I allow you to be there. And we're going to go into another message later on in the series, where we'll see how God reveals to King Nebuchadnezzar that only God has the power, and he can take his power away and he can give it back whenever he wants. And we're going to see that in another message. In verse 11 it says, it is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is now with flesh. Again, they're correct. No one can tell this dream but God. They said the gods who are now with flesh. In that, they're correct. Their gods doesn't have any flesh. Their gods are made out of what? Clay, bronze, metals, all kinds of metals, right? Gold, silver, whatever, iron, wood. What else? Whatever you could make a god with, right? Mud, they made, right? And they praise these gods. But that's what they are. They're just figures, right? Made by man with man's hands. So none of these gods is going to be able to tell the king what he wants to know. But guess what? What do we claim as Christians? That our God is what? It's alive. We have a God that's alive, a God that lives, a God that speaks to us, a God that reveals things to us, a God that does not lie to us, a God that is perfect. We have a God that when we are in desperate situation, in desperate need, we can call upon. We can kneel down and cry out to God, and he's going to give us an answer. Mm-hmm. And I talked last week about the movie Breakthrough, right? And if you haven't seen it, please do. This woman went down on her knees because her son had been dead for over an hour. And she cried out to God and she said, Holy Spirit, give me back my son. And the doctor says that the scream was heard down the hallway when she said that. And all you heard was beep, beep, beep. The kid's heart started beeping again after an hour of being dead. That's the God that we have. Amen. The Chaldeans couldn't say that. The magicians couldn't say that. The sorcerers couldn't say that. King Nebuchadnezzar and his people couldn't say that. They had a God that they worshiped, but it was just, stones, rocks. metal. They were just images. And so, the revelation of this supernatural thing can only be done by God or one of his servants to which he has shown the dream. Daniel 2:12 and 13 says, "For this reason the king was angry and very furious, and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them." The king, as he's supposed to be, he's keeping his word, right? He said, "We're going to kill all the wise men because none of them can tell me the dream." But that also included Daniel and his 3 friends. And they started killing them. They started killing them. But Daniel and his friends needed to do something. And so my third point is that God reveals the dream to Daniel. So Daniel approaches Arioch, the captain of the king's commanders, and he says, "Hey, what's going on? What is the king doing?" And he says, "Well, the king sent me to start killing all the wise men of Babylon." That includes you, buddy. And he says, wait a minute. Let me go talk to the king before you do anything. Let me talk to the king, right? And he goes before the king and he asks for time. And the king gives him that time. Now, you have to be in good standings before the king, because after all of this and all of the madness that has gone on, and the king being furious about this guy not being able to tell him the dream, for the king to allow Daniel to have time to do it. The only thing that tells me is that the king wanted to really know what the dream was. And so anybody that came before him and said, "I'll be able to tell you the dream if you give me some time," he was willing to do that. I guess it depended on how much time, right? It depended on how much time. In Daniel 17:18, it says, "Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah." These names are the same names that we see as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are the real names, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were the names that they were given by the king to these guys. And he says, "That they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon." In times of desperation, what do you need? You need warriors, praying warriors. That's what they're doing. They're becoming prayer warriors. We find ourselves a lot of times in difficult situations. We find ourselves in the most difficult times. And when those difficult times comes, many of us, instead of becoming prayer warriors, we go into depression, we get stressed out, and we try to solve these things on our own. That is not the time for us to try to be heroes and try to do things on our own. When we are going through difficult times, we need to seek prayer. When my grandson, was 7.5 years ago, I guess, right? Was born with a heart condition. And they told us that they had to do surgery within 3 days. I went into prayer mode. That's what I did. Prayer mode. And God revealed to me that he was going to be fine. As a matter of fact, my wife and I, the day of the surgery, we went to this church that was having a prayer meeting at 5 o'clock in the morning. And we went to the church at 5 o'clock in the morning. And we had everyone praying for him. The doctor came in that morning and he said, we're going to do the surgery. Now this is on the 7th day. They did the surgery on the 7th day of birth. On the 3rd day, what they did is they opened up a hole in his heart. So he was born with a hole in his heart. And the 2 arteries in his heart were reversed. So the blood that was supposed to circulate to the brain was going to the heart. The blood was to the lungs. The blood was supposed to be going to the lung was going to the brain. But he was born with a hole in his heart for a purpose. Because in that hole in his heart, a little bit of the blood that was supposed to go to the brain was still going to the brain. And a little bit of the blood that was going to the heart, to the lungs was going to the lung, because they were mixing in the hole. And so what they did is they made another hole in his heart to let more blood circulate so that he could have enough blood so that he could be strong enough to be able to go through this surgery. So on his 7th day of birth, they were to perform this surgery. And the doctor came to us and he said that morning, and he said, if a nurse comes to you in the middle of the surgery, sometime around noon, because the surgery was supposed to go all day, that's bad news. And we said, okay. I prayed and prayed and prayed, but God kept telling me he'll be fine. But about noon, the nurse came in. And we all freaked out. I remember we all freaked out. But the only thing she came to tell us was that the first part of the surgery went well, and they were going into the second part of the surgery. But it was crazy. I mean, the doctor told us that if they came in around noon, something was going wrong. But I guess the way I took it was this. God wanted us to know that he was working behind the scenes. Amen. That everything will be fine. And he was fine. In desperate times, we need to be prayer warriors. That's what Daniel and his people were doing. They became prayer warriors. They went out and they prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. Until in verse 19 it says, then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And the verses from 9 to 22, actually even 23, from 20 to 23, is Daniel blessing God. Daniel praising God. Daniel reaching out to God and saying thank you, right? He's thanking God from the bottom of his heart because God had actually revealed to him the dream. God had actually told him, look, this is the dream and this is the interpretation. Not only did he give him the whole dream again, he gave him the interpretation to the dream. So it wasn't like God gave Daniel the dream and said, it's up to you, buddy, now to interpret it. He gave him the whole thing. That's how God works. God doesn't do things halfway. Amen. God will never do things halfway. God will ever reveal to you what he wants you to know, and he'll fully reveal it to you. He will never leave anything for you to have to interpret. The enemy might do that. The enemy might put things in your head and mess with you so that you will start thinking about things. God will never do that. And that's when you know the difference between God and the enemy. God will always give you the answer to whatever it is that you need to know. He says in verse 23, I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. Look what he says, God of my fathers. When Daniel came to Babylon, he was in his early teens, mid-teens. Right? He was maybe 13, 14, 15, 16, around that age. He was raised right. Because he knew what was right and what was wrong before God at that age. So he was one of those Jewish kids, him and his 3 friends, that were raised in the right path that God has set the Israelites to. Remember, the nation of Judah was taken to Babylon because of their disobedience to God. Apparently, these 4 young men were not a part of that. And so God placed them in a place within the kingdom of Babylon to succeed and not be in the pain with everybody else. God set them aside because they were people who followed God. And God meant to use them tremendously. So he thanks God for the wisdom that he had just received and the knowledge that God had given him. He thanks God for giving him the dream and interpretation. And it's a testimony to us, right? That when we really seek God, he is going to respond to us with grace and with mercy. But we need to humble ourselves before God, which is what Daniel did. Daniel and his friends humbled themselves before God. And God showed his love for them by giving them what they were asking for. If we want something from God, we need to humble ourselves. And it's not just asking God for something that we want, but asking God for something that we really need. Because one of the problems we have, again, is that we ask God for things that we don't really need. And God says, you don't need that, so I'm not going to give it to you. And sometimes we insist and insist and insist, and God says, you know what, if that's what you want, you can have it. But the consequences are yours. And then we go through trials and tribulations that we didn't need to go through. We have to be willing to accept what God has for us. We have to be willing to accept the things that God wants to give us. When we seek God, we have to seek God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. The Bible tells us that. And that's what Daniel and his friends did. God knows what's best for us. He knows what's best for us. But we must accept it. Whatever it is, whatever the situation, we must accept it. Give it time, and God is going to reveal to us all the things that we need to know. Let me close with this. There's a jury considering the death penalty for this man who, and the lawyer that's defending this man comes to the podium and has a revelation to make, right? And he comes to the podium and says to the judge, Your Honor, this man cannot be put to death. And the judge says, why not? Because the victim is alive. Now, they haven't found the body. This man is being accused of death, but they haven't found the body. He says the victim is alive. Well, if he's alive, why don't you bring... He's about to walk in through this courtroom right now. And everybody turns and looks towards the door, right? And then the man turns around and says, you all looked to the back to see if the man was walking into this door. Which means none of you are sure if the man is dead. How could you put somebody to death when no one turned around? When everybody turned around to see if the man was going to walk into that door. So he says, Your Honor, that's all I have to say. And he sits down. And the judge says, I sentenced the man to death. And the judge stands, the lawyer stands up and says, Your Honor, but I thought I just proved that the man could not have killed the man because nobody knows that he's dead. The judge says, I do, because he never turned around. See, he knew he had killed him, so he never turned around to look. So he was sentenced to death. If he thought the man was going to be walking through those doors, he would have looked as well. But he did. See, we have a God that judges us. And the God that judges us tells us that he knows everything and that we can't hide anything. But he's also wise. And no matter how much wisdom he gives to us, he has more wisdom than we can think of. No matter how much knowledge he gives to us, he has much more knowledge than we can ever think of. And so, as believers, as people of God, we need to be able to follow in the footsteps of that man God that came to earth once and is still in our hearts today. That's the man Jesus Christ. Man God, 100% man, 100% God. He came to earth to show us how to live our lives. Let's use his life as an example of how we walk with God for the rest of ours. Let's pray.